Thank you for joining, everyone. We'll begin at 10:05 to let participants join the Zoom call. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending the Communities in Charge How to Apply workshop. We're excited to have you and tell you more about our project. Next slide, please. A few introductions before we start today. My name is Julia Deschamps, and I'm a project manager on the Communities in Charge team. Our speakers today will include Jeffrey Cook, Deputy Director at CalSTART, and Xiomara Chavez, Lead Project Manager. For our Q&A session at the end of the presentation, Jeffrey and Xiomara will be joined by Phil Kazel from the California Energy Commission. Next slide, please. A few reminders surrounding Zoom logistics. Please see the audio setting dropdown on the screen, as well as the Q&A box for your questions. Also, due to high traffic, you may experience technical difficulties during the presentation. We apologize in advance for any potential delays or compromised presentation quality. If you miss any part of the presentation or have any questions, you can contact us at communitiesinCharge@calstart.org or visit the website at www.thecommunitiesinCharge.org. Next slide, please. The workshop's agenda will start with workshop goals, followed by the application journey, which includes how to prepare, register, apply, and the notice of award and payment process. We will then move on to additional considerations, followed by upcoming dates, and lastly, the Q&A session. Next slide. Our workshop goals revolve around the following high-level questions. Where do applicants apply? What does applying look like? What documents must applicants have and what information? Who might applicants partner with? And lastly, when applicants can begin the process and how long they have to complete it. Next slide, please. Our first poll question of today is, how did you hear about Communities in Charge? Please select your answer, and we'll keep this open for about a minute to let participants answer. Okay, thank you. Looks like we have at 23% CEC docket announcement. And the next is CalStart newsletter at 17%. Next slide, please. Our second poll question of today, are you attending on behalf of an equity-focused community-based organization? If yes, please include the name of the organization. Okay, thank you. Looks like we have 77% no's and 23% yes. Thank you. Next slide, please. I will now hand it off to Xiomara to dive into preparing for the application process.
Thank you so much, Julia. Once again, my name is Xiomara Chavez. I'm the lead program manager for Communities in Charge. As we get into the meat and potatoes of our workshop, questions are welcome, so you're encouraged to enter them in the chat, in the Q&A chat box, sorry, but we will answer them all at the end of the presentation. Before we get to the apply portion of our presentation, I would like to start off by providing some tips and tricks to get you off on the right foot to prepare for with a competitive application. Next slide. Before applications open later this quarter, our project team identified these 4 key areas to help you prepare. If you have already taken these steps, that is awesome and you are on your way. But if you are new to installing level 2 chargers, taking the following steps will help you prepare for the most competitive application. We encourage you that you get to know your key partners, get to know your project site, understand your budget and any other additional incentives, and prepare documents. Just a quick note, we will be releasing a few documents to help guide you very soon. Additionally, our next workshop will take a deep dive on how to fill out these applications or these application documents. Next slide. So getting to know your key partners. Installing level 2 chargers will take several key partners to help you begin your project and to successfully install. If you are a lessee or you lease your property, be sure to get written approval from your property owner before starting your project. If you have access to a facilities manager, they can help you identify and locate electrical equipment around the property. Electrical contractors are super essential. They can help you do a site assessment and give quote estimates. It is a good practice to get several quotes to find the best deal for your budget. Don't forget to verify that your contractor is EVITP certified, and the best way to find them is through the EVITP websites or GoBiz. Additionally, in the case that your project requires new service or upgrades, contact your local utility to begin these conversations. Depending on the complexity of your project, service upgrades can cause delays in your project. Finally, don't forget to reach out to your local permitting authority or authority having jurisdiction, or sometimes it's just called going to City Hall to fill out a permit application. All projects are required to have a permit to be funded if your project is selected. Next slide. Getting to know your site. To clarify, this is the site that you own or lease where you're planning to install your level 2 chargers. As you get to know your key partners, this will lead you to understand your site a little better, but there are some additional questions that will help you assess a bit further. So it'd be important to know how many EV or hybrids you visit regularly. If you were to install level 2s, how many EVSEs and connectors will you need? How long do you think your visitors will charge for? And does your site currently meet the potential electrical demands? Next slide. I don't think it's a surprise that financing the installation of level 2 EVSEs can be quite challenging given the cost of equipment, labor, and materials. Not only does our project staff encourage that you seek out multiple quotes, shop around for affordable equipment, but we also encourage that you look out for other incentives that will help lower your out-of-pocket costs. Even though you can't stack the communities in charge incentive with investor-owned utilities incentives, we encourage that you look for incentives with municipal owned utilities and other non-CEC related programs. Next slide. Now that we have gone on some ways that you can prepare for your application, let's talk about the next steps from a high level. Next slide. Annual was posted on December 23rd, 2022. This is an important date to keep in mind and to remember, because it means that on or after this date, you are able to incur costs that will be eligible for reimbursement. And incurred costs means that the invoice must be dated on or after December 23rd, 2022 for this project. And please keep in mind that any incurred costs are at your own risk. And then our application window is slated to open later this quarter. Next slide. So now that we know that you're able to incur costs, the next thing that you can look forward to is to register to the IPC before the application window opens. Once the application window opens, you will, in later Q1, you will have 45 days to complete the application for all of your projects. If then your project is selected, you will receive a notice of conditional or final award. Then you will have 270 calendar days to install and have the opportunity to submit for midpoint and final payments. Of course, we will go into further detail into what all of this means in the coming slides. Next slide. Currently, our staff is developing the Incentive Processing Center, but as soon as it is ready, it will be available for all of you to register. Next slide. The Incentive Processing Center, or AKA the IPC, is a platform where you will be able to enter application information, upload documents, check on the state of your, one second, so sorry. I apologize. Working from home and cats are very difficult. Back where we were on the IPC. The Incentive Processing Center, or the IPC as we know it, is a platform where you will be able to enter application information, upload documents, check on the state of your application, and receive messages from staff. It's recommended to register early to familiarize yourself with the platform. And if you encounter any technical difficulties, we can resolve them so you have as much time as you need to submit your application in the 45-day window. Our project staff will send out notification about the IPC's availability through our website, email list, and CEC docket. Next slide. The required information that you will need to submit, but not limited to, is okay, so now that we're in the application stage, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. The required information that you'll need to submit is not limited to the following, but you will need applicant information. So that's your org name, a primary contact, tax ID, submit information about your project site, submit a site verification form, and a job site installation form. Next slide. Now for documents that you will need to upload in the IPC are final or preliminary site design, issued permit or building permit application, community connection documentation, and letters of support as applicable to your project. Since Communities in Charge is structured in readiness tiers, the type of documentation will vary according to the tier. And if your site is a community connection, you will also have a subset of documentation on your project. You can find this documentation listed in the implementation manual, and we will also review it in depth in the next workshop. Also, I can show you a handy chart in the next slide that will help clarify what documents are needed for each tier. Next slide. So this chart is pretty handy. On the columns, you're able to see the readiness tiers, tier 1 being the most ready, and tier 3 meaning you're the least ready. And all of these will be selected for different amounts of awards, but we are seeking like the most ready in tier 1. But if you are a tier 1 applicant, you will need to submit a site verification form, a final site design, issued building permits, and then if your project asks or requires, you can submit community connection documentation and letters of support. And then tier 2, you would need a site verification form, final site design, and a building permit application. And then the other documents as applicable. And then if tier 3, which is the least of the readiness tiers, you will need a site verification form and a preliminary site design. If tier 2 and tier 3 are selected, later it'll be explained by Jeff of like how much extra time you'll have to be able to submit a final site design and an issued building permit. Okay, so then next slide. Okay, poll time. So how many project sites do you expect you shall apply for? Please launch the poll. Okay, we can go ahead and end the poll. So it looks like about 59% of you will be applying for 1 to 10 projects. 28% will be applying for 11 to 25 project sites. And then after that, it kind of like cuts down. About 8% of you will go up to 50 project sites, and about 5% will be over 51 project sites. Okay, next slide. Okay, poll question number 4. Do you expect to submit documentation to be considered a community connection? Select all that apply. Awesome, we can go ahead and end the slide or end the poll. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you will be submitting documentation for multifamily housing in charge. The next one would be nonprofits in charge, followed by schools, healthcare, tribes, and congregations. All right, thank you for taking the time to answer our polls. And now I'll hand it off to Jeff Cook. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everyone. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so to tee up what will become our next poll question, we wish to remind attendees of the documents required to achieve a given readiness tier. Xiomara did a great job of teeing this up before, but it bears a little bit of repeating. So applications which include a site verification form and preliminary site plans only shall be considered readiness tier 3. Applications which include a site verification form, final site design, and their building permit application shall be considered readiness tier 2, and applications which include a site verification form, final site design, and issued building permit shall be considered readiness tier 1. Next slide. So we've got another poll question here. Which readiness tier do you expect your submitted applications to be in? Select all that apply. Bear in mind that with Communities in Charge launching later this quarter, which of these readiness tiers do you anticipate your applications will fall under? Okay, it appears that things have leveled off, so let's end that poll and let's share the results with our participants and go through those. So it looks like about 48% are not quite sure which readiness tier they may fall under, followed by 40% believe they'll fall under tier 2, with 30% of respondents indicating their applications should fall under tier 1, and 26% of respondents indicating their applications will fall under tier 3. Thanks so much for sharing. This is really, really helpful. And let's move on to the next slide. In this slide, let's go over the scoring rubric. In addition to sorting by project readiness, as we described in past slides, applications will be scored based upon the physical location of the project site and the degree to which that site may serve a predefined community connection. For more information on community connections, please refer to the implementation manual, which is posted on the Communities in Charge website. 10 points shall be awarded to those project sites who are able to demonstrate that their site is a defined community connection. 3, 4, or 5 points shall be awarded based upon the designation of the site as a priority population, i.e. a low-income community, disadvantaged community, or tribal land. The relevant maps to determine these designations have been referenced and linked in the implementation manual available online. Finally, an application may be accompanied by up to 3 letters of support from separate community-based organizations serving the same community as the project site for a maximum total points of 18. Next slide. Moving on to notices of award, applications chosen for award based upon readiness level, score, and available funding shall be communicated after the 45-day application window has closed. Applications chosen for award and whose readiness tier is 2 or 3 shall receive a notice of conditional award. These awardees will then have 90 calendar days to submit a copy of their final site plans and a copy of their issued building permit for review through the Online Incentive Processing Center, or IPC. Once verified, their award status shall be converted to a final award. Applications chosen for award whose readiness tier is 1 shall move straight to receipt of a notice of final award, and all recipients of notices of final award shall have 270 calendar days to complete their installation and submit a request for final payment through the online IPC. Final award recipients may also request a midpoint payment prior to completing their project if they so choose. Next slide. And so speaking of midpoint payment, let's talk about what is involved in that. Next slide. Only recipients of a notice of final award may be eligible to request a midpoint payment. Midpoint payments may receive up to 50% of the amount listed on their notice of final award. A request for midpoint payment must include a copy of invoices with valid invoice date, an itemization of costs, and proof of payment if applicable. It must also include the detailed information on EVSEs being installed, the general contractor's name, license, and signature, as well as the names and verifiable EVITP certification numbers for all EVITP certified electricians on site. Next slide. For the final payment, next slide, requests for this final payment, again, must be made within 270 calendar days from the receipt of their notice of final award. Payments shall not exceed 75% of eligible costs or the magnitude of an application's notice of final award, whichever is less. For applications which were granted a midpoint payment and are now requesting a final payment, the remainder of their notice of final award shall be the maximum amount they may receive. Requests for final payment must include the same information as mentioned in the previous section on midpoint payment and are illustrated once again here. Next slide. In addition to copies of invoices and proof of compliance with AB 841 through inclusion of EVITP certified technician information, a request for final payment must include a copy of the final inspection card, a copy of the paid and executed network agreement or contract, and photos of all installed equipment with serial numbers of those equipment clearly visible. Next slide. And let's just touch on a couple of additional considerations with respect to participants in communities in charge. Next slide. Once project sites are operational and final payments have been requested, responsibilities associated with their participation in communities in charge continue past the commissioning of their site. Applicants shall ensure data is provided to CalSTART for a period of 24 continuous months or 2 years following their project site's final commissioning. Project sites are also expected to be reliably operated and ensure a consistent experience for its users. Therefore, each Level 2 EVSE must maintain 97% uptime during a site's standard hours of operation. Further clarification on the specifics of this requirement shall align with AB 2061. The installed Level 2 EVSEs must remain in service at the installation address for the duration of their network service agreement or 24 months and not relocated. Finally, Communities in Charge staff may request responses to regular surveys for a period of 36 months and be available for follow-up inspections if requested. Now, to wrap things up and bring us into the Q&A portion of our webinar, I will pass it back over to Julia.
Thank you, Jeff. Excuse me. Thank you, Jeff. Next slide, please. Here are a few upcoming dates to keep in mind. Our implementation manual was posted as of December, and in February, we'll post our application packet and sample supporting documents. In early Q1, we will launch the full website, and participants will be able to register through the Incentive Processing Center, IPC. In late Q1, applications will be open, and on March 1st, we will have another workshop on the application forms and process. Next slide, please. We have another poll question here. Our project has a few final poll questions. What subjects are you looking to learn more about in future webinars? Thank you. And looks like we have at 55% best practices for getting community. Sorry, some technical difficulties. 55% voted best practice for getting community buy-in for your project. 54% how to successfully plan and install level 2 EVSEs. 48% how to find key project partners, followed by information relating to potential benefits for site hosts once installation is complete. And lastly, at 39%, considerations for choosing level 2 EVSEs for your project site. Thank you. Next slide, please. And poll question number 7. How would you describe your overall satisfaction with the information provided during today's webinar? Okay, thank you for voting. 48% satisfied, followed by 27% neutral and 24% very satisfied. Thank you. Next slide, please. To contact the Communities in Charge team, you can check out our website at www.thecommunitiesinCharge.org. And for additional questions, you can email us at communitiesinCharge@calstart.org. And lastly, the CEC docket will house all Communities in Charge webinars and presentations, and these slides will be available there. Next slide, please. We'll move on to our Q&A session now. We will be prioritizing questions regarding program design, timelines, and will not be addressing specific questions on project site eligibility. Specific questions regarding individual projects may be discussed during our regular office hours. And with the high volume of individuals, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. First question we have here is for Xiomara. What or where is the link for the Incentive Processing Center?
Thanks, Julia. The IPC, or the Incentive Processing Center, is still being developed, and we will be announcing its opening and will be linked in our newly developed website later this quarter. So just keep an eye out via email, the CEC dockets, and the website, and other announcements. But yeah, the information will be shared far and wide.
Thank you. Next question is for Jeff. Are the labor costs by the EVITP certified electrician during construction that are paid at prevailing wage an eligible cost for the fast track lane?
So I can speak to the cost eligibility under communities in charge here. The fast track lane, as it turns out, is a reference to a separate incentive project, and I'll defer to that project team for questions on EV fast track. However, the labor costs paid at prevailing wage to EVITP certified technicians may be eligible for incentives under communities in charge. For more information on what costs are eligible and which costs are not, all of those are enumerated in our implementation manual available at thecommunitiesinCharge.org.
Thank you. Next question is also for Jeff. Would you further define final site design, PE stamped?
So the final site design that one would bring into their authority having jurisdiction, town hall, whomever their permitting agency is, for submission and ultimate securing of a issued building permit is what we're referring to there when we're speaking of a final site design.
Thank you. Next question for Xiomara. Will the presentation and recorded session be available shortly after today's webinar?
Absolutely. We'll just need a couple of business days to wrap everything up and send it out to our registration list.
Thank you. Next question is for Jeff. Are local governments eligible?
So local governments are eligible to submit an application through communities in charge. One thing to bear in mind is that oftentimes with local governments, there can be some timelines that one needs to keep in mind with respect to securing things like an issued building permit. And if that is something that you believe may hold up your project, I would just encourage you to plan accordingly. And if you are intending to submit an application to communities in charge, bear in mind that if you do land yourself in Tier 2 or Tier 3 of readiness and are unable to provide your final issued building permit and final site plans within 90 days from the date of your receipt of notice of conditional award, then we will move on to other applications that may be eligible.
Thank you, Jeff. Next question, also for Jeff. Can you provide some information about applicant eligibility?
Sure. I'll just mention that the applicant eligibility is all enumerated in the implementation manual. And if you have any specific questions with respect to applicant eligibility or participation overall, feel free to send those to communitiesinCharge@calstart.org.
Thank you. And next question for Jeff. I don't see the link to be a community connection on the website. Can you share that process?
Certainly. So becoming a community connection involves the submission of specific documentation along with your application to communities in charge. Depending upon which community connection you are attempting to be considered, that will dictate the documentation which will need to be submitted. All that is outlined in our implementation manual available online, and we do not currently have on our landing page a specific avenue for one to be considered a community connection. It is on a site-by-site basis.
Next question for Jeff. Is in front of the meter upgrades covered under this grant program?
So all costs that are associated with being eligible under communities in charge lie from the customer side of things. So no utility side infrastructure is eligible for incentives through communities in charge. Also, it is important to note that combination with other IOU Make Ready programs does preclude one from participation in communities in charge.
Next question for Ciamara. How will your program ensure that the most installs are distributed equitably?
That's a great question. Right now, our goal is to meet the 50% of all of the $30 million funds that's available for this project. 50% be aimed at low income or disadvantaged communities. But for our project team, we're setting our sights to up to 70% of that be distributed to LIC, DIC communities. And then also in terms of the way that the program was designed, we created the community connections to be sites where a lot of our communities live and gather, and spend a solid amount of time at to be sure that they are able to access level 2 charging. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. And I'll also ask Jeff if I'm missing anything or if you have anything to add.
No, I will just kind of double down on what you did a great job of characterizing there, Ciamara, which is, and I believe this kind of addresses one of the next questions, which is this first funding round will total $30 million of incentives, and at least 50% of those incentives shall go towards low-income communities or disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. Next question for Jeff. Can you explain what the letters of support look like and how we can find out if our building is located in a community connection?
Certainly. So letters of support can take lots of different shapes. We would want to make sure that it is on the letterhead of the community-based organization, providing that letter of support, and that this community-based organization is independently verifiable by CalSTART. So there's not one particular format that would be necessarily acceptable for us to consider this letter of support. And to the second point regarding whether or not your site is a community connection, we can't make specific claims on eligibility of whether or not an individual project site may or may not be considered a community connection until we see individual pieces of application materials.
Thank you, Jeff. Next question, also for you, are new construction projects eligible?
So new construction projects are, or new builds are not eligible through communities in charge. These must be established sites. Think of an existing parking lot in which an individual would want to add level 2 EV charging.
Next question for Jeff. Are commercial health organization buildings eligible to apply for the nonprofit communities in charge?
An applicant can certainly submit any documentation for a community connection to which they would like to be considered. And once our processing team receives that documentation, we will make the determination of whether or not they have met the requirements of that particular community connection.
Thank you. Next question for Ciamara. How do we find eligible contractors?
The best way to find eligible contractors is through the EVITP websites, and because they have like a list of electricians that have gone through that certification and are listed on that website. Or you can also go through the GoBiz website, and they also have a list of EVITP certified contractors.
Thank you. And next question for Xiomara as well. Were the communities to be served informed and consulted prior to the launch of this program? Is this program inclusive to farm worker and low-income families who will be able to afford an EV?
Absolutely. One of our partners, Grid Alternatives, has done a great job doing outreach to many different types of CBOs and community partners, and created an advisory group where they selected and vetted partners to bring in as much information to make recommendations for this project to be as inclusive as possible. Additionally, they sought out representatives for each type of community connection to be able to get their input on what documents are the most easily accessible for them, so they're able to prove that they are a part of a certain community connection. So we definitely tried our best to be as inclusive and get feedback from community, so everyone is able to participate as best as they can. Of course, like down the road, like we will be looking for more input, but for now, this was what we were able to do thus far.
Next question for Jeff. How are the low-income communities being mapped?
Low-income communities are being mapped, and you can find the map in our implementation manual. It is linked out there at thecommunitiesinCharge.org in accordance with AB 1550.
Next question for Jeff. Can you elaborate on any qualifications for a CBO?
Sure. So CBOs are oftentimes going to also be nonprofit or not-for-profit organizations. We would recommend taking a look at the implementation manual for any guidance around what would garner the most favorable and competitive application that would include this letter of support.
Thank you. And for Jeff, will there be a C10 requirement when it comes to electrical/EV infrastructure installations? Highly recommend it's a requirement.
So all level 2 project sites that participate in Communities in Charge must abide by all of the necessary laws, regulations, and codes. Definitely C10 electricians make a great fit for that. And oftentimes they will be either someone who is the general contractor or a C10 electrician is on site. So we definitely recommend for those who are seeking out resources to assist with the construction of their project site to seek out first and foremost C10 electricians where possible.
Next question for Xiomara. Do the DAC LIC requirements also include those which are half-mile from those communities?
No, there's no half-mile radius inclusion at this time.
Thank you. Next question for Jeff. For local governments in charge offering EVSEs for municipal fleets, do EVSEs need to be publicly accessible, or can they be exclusively accessible to the fleet?
Great question. So for local governments in charge, I'm pulling up our references here just so that I am speaking to this as accurately as possible. They may offer them to municipal fleets. They are initially intended to be installed for the use of either visitors or workers at the site itself, but may also be used for municipal fleets.
Next question for Jeff. You mentioned this round will have 30 million. Will there be subsequent rounds, and what funding will be available?
So it's always challenging to speak to subsequent rounds of funding here. I may actually pass it over to the Energy Commission just to make sure that we're positioning this correctly.
Sorry, I was looking for my mute. This is Phil Kazel with CEC. So yeah, the program was funded for up to $250 million. So we just don't have the timeline laid out yet for when future funding will be added to this part of the program, but keep your eyes open for it.
Thank you. Next question for Xiomara. Where on the website can the implementation manual be found?
Be sure that when you are on the website, you are at the address thecommunitiesinCharge.org. So that's THE communitiesinCharge.org. And then it's going to be on that main landing page. If you scroll down, you'll see the title about Communities in Charge. And then you'll see like 2 paragraphs explaining the program. And on the right-hand side, you will see an icon of the cover of our implementation manual. And it'll say for more information on Communities in Charge, download the implementation manual and a download button, and it will download a PDF for you, but be sure that you are on thecommunitiesinCharge.org.
Thank you, Xiomara. Next question for Jeff. Is a community college eligible to add to its existing charging banks?
Yes, community college may add to its existing charging banks. I would just add the note here that this would need to be a separate project and not something that is, part of an ongoing project.
Next question for Jeff. New building eligible site follow-up. If a project site is currently under construction and scheduled to be opened within the 270-day window, would it be eligible?
So this particular project, this new construction, must be completed before applying to Communities in Charge. If at that point this project site is one which wishes to add level 2 EV chargers and seek incentives for the installation of those EV chargers, then they are welcome to apply for Communities in Charge at that time.
Next question for Jeff. Are shipping costs and the first year's networking fees eligible costs? Also, can a third-party applicant receive the rebate, or does the owner?
The individual to incur the costs as outlined in the implementation manual is the only eligible applicant who can receive those incentives. As far as other costs which are eligible, those are all noted on the implementation manual itself, inclusive of networking and operations and maintenance agreements. I'll just touch on that.
Thank you. Next question for Xiomara. Is the light duty EV information required during application? Do we need to submit numbers, VINs of the light duty EVs?
Thank you, Julia. So for this incentive program, we are not focusing on the vehicles itself. We are focusing on the electric vehicle supply equipment, specifically level 2. So this is the part that will charge the vehicle. So please do not submit us your VIN numbers. We do not need those. But if you do decide to install level 2 chargers or level 2 EVSCs on your project sites, once you are ready to submit for a final payment, we will be asking for the serial number of the level 2 EVSCs and not a vehicle VIN number.
Next question for Xiomara. How are the applications treated for non-low income communities? Is that the lowest priority? Only leftover funds will go to regular community?
So I'm trying to take a moment to make sure I'm answering this correctly. For non-LIC DAC, So we are prioritizing LIC and DAC. I do want to make that very clear. If you reference the rubric that are available on this slide and also on the implementation manual, they do get additional points for being LIC DAC region. They will get at least 50% of all of funds. And so I would not frame this as it's leftover funds. It's really important that all of our communities be, be brought along equitably along this journey to electrification of the states. So yes, they are getting additional points to make sure that we are meeting at least the 50% to go to DLC, LIC per the CECs and the state's instructions. I hope that answers the question.
Next question for Xiomara. What paperwork should a public agency submit for city's corporation yard used for city workers, city business, suppliers, etc.?
I'm going to go ahead and refer you to the implementation manual where you will need to submit a site verification form. They're all leaving me from the top of my head. So all of the documentation needed for your readiness tier will need to be submitted. Any applicable documents for community connections and letters of support if needed. And then once you complete the installation, you will need to submit invoices, any completed building permits, and final site designs, all of that. Yeah, and this is all in the implementation manual. Jeff, am I missing anything?
No, I would just say that the application requirements in terms of documentation, necessary information that must be provided in order for an application to be considered are all enumerated in the implementation manual. And we recognize that sometimes there are some self-permitting entities that make this type of an application a little bit more challenging. However, we will be releasing some guidance documents in the near future here to hopefully address some of that. But the short answer is if you are a self-permitting entity, then that is still allowable under communities in charge.
Thank you. Next question for Jeff. Does the contract documents have to be designed and signed by a registered civil or electrical engineer with the state of California?
So for this, we don't want to necessarily speak to or make claims around who is the authority for various areas that might need to have their signature on a particular document. However, if these are permissible documents according to your authority having jurisdiction and in abidance with the state, local, and federal laws, then they may be permissible as and included with your application.
Thank you. Next question for Xiomara. Can you confirm there is no regional focus and that this program is open to communities across California?
Yes, it is confirmed. There is a statewide focus and not regionally focused at this time.
Next question is for Jeff. Please clarify that if community colleges are allowed to their existing banks as long as it is a new project and not an ongoing project, assuming this is applicable to all project sites.
So I think your question is kind of getting after really what is permissible from a new build standpoint. And so if you have a project that is currently underway, that construction has begun, and you're considering whether or not that particular project may be one for which you'd like to apply to communities in charge. I will say that new builds and projects who have already begun construction are not eligible to apply for communities in charge. If, however, you are about to wrap up or have recently completed a given piece of construction or a recent build and are thinking about adding level 2 EV chargers to that, then we would encourage you to apply to communities in charge for that unique and distinct construction project of the installation of those level 2 chargers.
Next question for Jeff. Can nonprofits/churches seek reimbursement for costs incurred to develop final site design guide and building permit from the program?
So design and engineering costs may be eligible through communities in charge. One of the explicit preclusions of costs which cannot be considered eligible through communities in charge are fees paid to authorities having jurisdiction around permits.
Thank you, Jeff. Next question is for Xiomara. Is there an approved level 2 product list for the program?
There are some eligibility requirements in the slides from our October workshop, and then I think they're also listed in the implementation manual. But later on this quarter, we will be launching our new and updated website where there will be a catalog that will show you the approved L2 product list. And yeah, so those will be the ones that will be eligible for reimbursement. So just stay tuned for our website launch.
Next question is for Jeff. Can an air district apply for this program and apply to this program as we serve all of low-income communities and JACs?
So it sounds like this question has to do with how does one find their way into being considered a low-income community or disadvantaged community. So I'll speak to the applicant eligibility side of things, which is enumerated in our implementation manual. But if an individual who happens to work at an air district wishes to apply for an eligible project to communities in charge, they are welcome to do so. Whether or not that project is considered a low-income community or disadvantaged community is fully dependent upon the geographic location of that project site.
Next question is for Jeff. If the individual to incur costs are only the eligible applicants, will communities in charge have an approved vendor list by which approved vendors can apply on behalf of a site host?
Vendors are welcome to apply as authorized representatives for the lessee or property owner to communities in charge. At present, communities in charge will be making resources available to provide references to vendors and contractors that may perform installation services for the project site seeking incentives. However, at this time, we do not plan to have a list of eligible vendors so as to preclude those that might be outside of that list from participation.
Next question is for Jeff. EV chargers must be made. Do EV chargers have to be made US made?
No, EV chargers do not need to be US made. And if you are curious about the charger eligibility requirements, those are listed in the implementation manual.
Next question for Jeff. Will DC fast chargers be eligible in the future?
For those folks that are interested in pursuing incentives towards the installation of DC fast chargers, I would encourage you to look at the Cali VIP 2.0 or Golden State Priority Project that is implemented by the Center for Sustainable Energy. If I'm not mistaken, the application window for that is currently open, and you may visit calevip.org to learn more.
Next question is for Xiomara. Are interconnection fees imposed by the utilities eligible for reimbursement?
I'm gonna again refer you to the implementation manual. I'm looking at it now. I'm personally not too sure. I'll bring in Jeff or Phil, but it doesn't seem. Can someone else on the team confirm?
So interconnection fees, if this is something that you are going to incur as a direct cost associated with the installation of your level 2 EV infrastructure and shall be invoiced to you by whomever the party is performing the construction and everything associated with installation, then it's something that we may consider as eligible. It currently is not explicitly listed as an eligible cost on our implementation manual, though.
Thank you. Next question is for Jeff. How can a provider ensure that their product will be included on the catalog to be published later in the quarter?
So the entirety of eligible equipment that may be eligible for incentives when we launch later on this quarter may be found on our October slides during the public meeting, which are docketed on the CEC docket. They will also be included on our soon-to-be revamped website, thecommunitiesinCharge.org. For those who are seeking to be considered for future iterations of Communities in Charge, we would encourage you to reach out to the project team at communitiesinCharge@calstart.org.
And Jeff, looks like there's a comment. Maybe you could explain that to participants.
Sure, a couple of things here. The question with respect to sharing a link of the implementation manual on our website, we can certainly look into including that in the chat here so that's made available to folks. But one thing to bear in mind here, as we've had a couple of questions around the lines between applicant and the rebate recipient, person applying to Communities in Charge for incentives that the person applying to Communities in Charge for incentives towards costs they have incurred in association with the installation of level 2 EV chargers is the entity responsible to ensure that the 97% uptime alluded to earlier in the slides, they are the responsible party to ensure that that 97% uptime is met. So we just wanted to call that out here. And if there's anything further clarity-wise on legislation that's coming forth as part of AB 2061 that CEC wants to make an announcement on, we can certainly hold some space for them here.
Thank you. I'm just double checking here for questions. One moment, please. Let's see. So next question here. populated now for Jeff. The data collection requirements includes the reporting of vehicle make, model, and year engaged in a charging station. This information is seldom provided to a site by the EV network / charger companies due to privacy concerns. What is the workaround for this situation?
So as a result of Communities in Charge being funded through the general fund, there are certain data collection requirements that we do need to flow down to those participants in the incentive project itself. We do want to acknowledge the challenge that's associated with gathering some of the data there, really only pertaining to vehicle make and model for a variety of reasons. So for that reason, we understand that that may be a challenge. If it's unable to be reported, then we would just encourage you to work with the network provider with whom you have agreed to sign on to a network agreement with, and ensure that they are communicating and coordinating with our team appropriately.
Thank you. Next question is for Xiomara. Have the dates been finalized for the website launch and application release?
We don't have exact dates quite yet, but I can give some timeframes. The website launch will be at the end of February, and then the application window opening is going to happen towards the last half of March.
Thank you, Xiomara. Just pulling up some more questions here, double checking. Looks like we've addressed the written questions. We'd like to open it up for verbal questions now. So please feel free to raise your hand. And let's see. Or to continue putting it in the Q&A box. Okay, I see Marlo. I see your hand raised.
Yes, hi. I put my question in the Q&A, but it wasn't answered. I'll just ask it here. My question is, for our building has the building occupancy permit or building permit approved. It's a low income, it has its low income deed, but that implementation manual does not specify how many units need to be low income housing.
So this is Jeff. I'm happy to address that question again here, Marlo. So if you are seeking to be part of a multifamily housing in charge community connection, we would need to see that deed restriction submitted with your application materials, as well as any other documentation that would be required in association with a multifamily in charge application.
Yes, it is low. It has the deed of low income, but it's only 5 units of the 27 units that are low income. Does that matter, or just having the deed matters?
Right now, the only stipulation that we currently have in our implementation manual that pertains to that particular question is whether or not the property itself has that low income deed restriction, which is what we would need to see.
Okay, thank you.
Next, I see Sergio.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I also place a question. This is definitely a really great program, but I want to just make sure that the program is considering the different dynamics of different communities. I am so happy to hear that there were some community involvement that provide feedback, but I think in the future the effort should be extended to other rural communities. just to give an example, just to put things in perspective, we provide technical assistance to farm worker families living in small mobile home parks. And I don't know, number one, if the mobile home park qualify under multifamily. It's the largest population of mobile home parks per capita in California. We were interested, but here's the situation. The majority, 100% of farm worker families and low-income families living in these mobile home parks, they drive combustible, cars. So if this grant is to propose the implementation of, EV chargers stations, it's great. It's fantastic. And this is what we're looking in the very, very near future to do. But how this is going to actually serve those communities that don't have EV cars? And the question is, how many farm workers and low-income people will be able to afford a $35,000, $40,000, $60,000 EV cars that is in the market right now? So how do we fill the gap between installing the EV chargers to help families while the families still don't have EV cars? Can you please elaborate on that?
This is Jeff. I'm happy to elaborate on that question and say that this particular incentive project is strictly focused on the incentivization of level 2 EV chargers and the infrastructure costs associated with deploying those. There are a number of other incentive projects, rebate programs available across the state of California that we certainly encourage folks to look into or explore options of. However, the scope of Communities in Charge is strictly limited to just the level 2 EV charger infrastructure and the associated costs with installing those. So thank you very much. I've jotted down a note here just as a item here to increase outreach to more rural communities and engage with those for subsequent funding rounds. Thank you very much for your question, Sergio.
You're welcome, Jeff. And just as a follow-up quickly, are you going to require the applicants to submit how many EV cars each project will be serving? Just to make sure that you don't end up installing your chargers and nobody uses because the majority is still driving, combustible cars. Thank you.
So one of the requirements for participation in Communities in Charge that was alluded to earlier on the subject of data collection is to get on exactly what you are hitting on there, Sergio, which is utilization data. So that is something that we will be collecting after the sites go in. However, it is not a prerequisite for project site hosts to submit a survey of, say, how many individual vehicles this site may actually serve.
Thank you, Sergio. Next, I see Christina. You're still muted if you're speaking. We'll move on. Sorry, Christina, we can't hear you, but I'll come back to you. I see Jonathan.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I work for the utility in San Diego. And I just wanted a two-part question. One was, did I hear correctly that if a participant is involved with a utility make-ready infrastructure program, that they are disqualified? And if so, what was the reasoning behind that? Thank you.
So Jonathan, you are correct there in terms of participation with IOU Make Ready programs, that it does preclude one from participating in Communities in Charge. There's a number of other incentive projects that would preclude participation, for instance, ongoing EV charging incentive projects funded by the Energy Commission. We just don't want to have those combination of funds occurring at once. I would refer you over to either Brian or Phil, who might be able to unpack a little bit on the reasoning and rationale behind preclusion of participation for those projects that may fall under IOU jurisdiction or IOU territory that would be interested in participating in Communities in Charge and SDG&E, SCE, PG&E's available Make Ready programs, should they also be eligible to participate.
Yeah, this is Brian Fauble. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go right ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, my name is Brian Fauble. I'm with the California Energy Commission. So the utility and specifically the IOU stackability for level 2 chargers has been something we have not allowed in our previous block grants, Cali VIP 1.0, and now in Communities in Charge, again, for a few different reasons that have complexity on making sure that we're not double billing, but also assuring that, you know, the goal of these block grants are to provide rebates and incentivize people that may not have been doing the installations in the first place. And so we know with the utility programs that they're large programs, ratepayer funded, and that those chargers, hopefully knock on wood, are going to be deployed anyways, as the pilot programs we saw were very successful. And so we're hoping that those chargers are going to be installed anyways, and we want to use our program to install additional chargers. And so we have not been allowing the stacking with the IOUs, but like mentioned previously, other programs, POUs, air districts, or city, et cetera, that are a little bit smaller, we usually will allow stacking with those. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted to comment for Christina. She just walked away. She told me to comment for her.
Yes, please go right ahead.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to clarify on the C10. The C10 holder is the contractor, and the electrician is the EVITP that has the certification. I just wanted to clarify that.
And thank you for that. This is Brian again. And I just note that EVITP is a separate entity as well. It's not through CalSTART, Communities in Charge, CEC, or any of us. But they do have their own requirements, which I believe is that EVITP contractors to take the test must be C10 licensed as well. But you can go to their website to see all the full requirements and eligibility.
And do you have another question? I see the hands raised again.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And looks like, okay, I see another hand. Alex, please go ahead.
Hi there. I just wanted to make sure that my question didn't get buried in the Q&A. It was still hanging out there. You referenced the list on the EVITP website, and I've been on that list. It's big, and I don't know if anyone's ever tried to find a contractor on a short-term basis or on a quick basis. It's not easy, especially with all the demand for electrification happening out there right now. So I'm wondering if you all have look to providing a list of pre-qualified contractors or otherwise interested folks who are geared up to do this and to engage with this program and potential clients.
Sure, this is Jeff. I'm happy to answer that, Alex, and thanks for your question. I think that there's certainly a good degree of value associated with having a list or short list for folks to refer to. However, that being said, with the number of eligible folks who can actually do this work out there and the existing lists that are put out, for example, by the governor's office, there's a number of resources currently available for folks to choose a contractor from. Just sort of the nature of needing to come up with a contractor does necessitate a good degree of planning, meaning they do need to have it on their schedule, meaning they need to be available for that particular geographic location and during that particular time that a given applicant is seeking to install chargers. However, at this time, Communities in Charge does not plan to have an eligible list of contractors for the reasons that we don't want to have contractors that might not be on said list to be precluded from participation and thereby limit the number of projects that could necessarily get in the ground.
Hi, this is Brian Fauble again. I just wanted to add to that and just echo what Jeff's been saying. But there also is one more resource on our sister block grant as well on Cali VIP that we did develop a while ago called Cali VIP Connects, which is kind of a tool that it's not a pre-qualified vendor list or contractor list, but it is, like you're saying, just a list of anybody that works in the industry that wants to kind of create a free profile. Think of it like a little Yelp or a phone book section. Instead of Googling who installs chargers, you can go here and see companies that make a profile. You can research them and then reach out to the ones you're interested in. And so it's kind of one little step that we're trying to connect people together on all of those. We are not vouching for any of those contractors or electricians, but it is just a resource for you to reach out and do your own research. And as well, besides the contractors, there's manufacturers, third parties that do project management, etc. So it's a good resource, and that can be found on the calivip.org website under Find a EV Provider.
Thank you. And next hand, I see Ashley.
Hello, thanks for letting me talk. You can hear me, right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. I'm looking at the implementation manual under local governments in charge, and I'm looking at, there's a star under the section for local governments in charge may offer level 2 chargers to municipal fleets. And my question is that I have an applicant in mind that was working on a policy thing where at first they want to open it to the municipal fleets because they don't have a policy yet to open it to the public. And then they want to open it to the anybody to use, visitors, guests, and everything. And so I'm wondering if that is what that star means. It says star local governments in charge may offer level 2 chargers to the municipal fleets. Does that mean the chargers can be used for the municipal fleets initially if they're in a low-income community only?
So to your question, Ashley, I think one of the other things to bear in mind with respect to the eligibility for use of the various chargers that one might install under Communities in Charge is that they do need to be available for shared use. So if the awardee is granted local governments in charge community connection status, but also has a Nissan Leaf that they use for their as part of their municipal fleet, or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, then they're welcome to use those chargers to juice up now and again. That is what's really meant here, that the local governments in charge awardees may offer that level 2 EVSE to municipal fleets for use. There cannot be any sort of one-to-one relationship between this is vehicle ABC's charger and parking spot in this particular location.
Next hand, I see Marlo.
Hi, I wanted to ask 2 questions. The first one was, if we don't get selected the first round, do we automatically get reapplied for the second round? or do we have to manually apply?
So applicants who aren't selected for the first round of funding, Marlo, will need to reapply.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, the site verification form is just a form I'm sure we fill out and submit, but the final site design, does that need any approvals from the local building and safety or the water and power? What does it entail? Is it a commitment letter like DWP gives?
I would recommend that you coordinate with your local authority having jurisdiction just to get the specifics on what any sort of final site plans will need to include, as it's lots of shades of gray across the state of California. And we want to make sure that whatever you are submitting as part of your application is as complete and valid as possible.
Thank you. And I see two more questions here for Jeff. Does the project site have to be one of the IOU service territories, or can it be in a municipality service territory?
A project site does not need to be in any particular territory, IOU, municipal, or otherwise. It just needs to be located within the state of California.
Thanks, Jeff. And another question for you. Can you repeat if the applicant has to hold C10?
An applicant to Communities in Charge is not required to have a C10 license.
And question for Jeff, building off the municipal fleet question, can those EVSEs be behind a gate that locks outside of business hours if during business hours it is available for shared use?
So these ones are a little bit tricky in that the requirements that we have in place for Communities in Charge do allow for certain private use cases. Good example for this could be a workplace in charge community connection, or just a workplace charging setup wherein only the employees for that business park or that location may use those chargers, and they are not allowed to be used by the outside public. I would just have anyone who's looking at establishing this type of a site bear in mind the fact that if there are multiple use cases for these chargers, meaning some of them being used by the municipal fleet from time to time, again, not ascribed to any one particular vehicle or individual, that if these chargers are being made available to the public in the case of, say, a pay per use, then there are lots of other considerations that you need to keep in mind. For instance, the Department of Weights and Measures requirements on public chargers. There are some card reader requirements on chargers which are made available to the public. There's also differing ADA or Americans with Disabilities Act requirements that apply to chargers which are made available to the public versus those that are entirely behind a fence.
And I see Christina, your hand's raised. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I wanted to clarify on what you mentioned about a contractor does not have to hold a C10. So when you refer to one of the slides that the applicants have to meet the requirements of the contractor's state license board, what are you referring to? Are you referring to a general contractor that holds multiple licenses with a C10, or do you have to have a C10 licensed contractor? What are you referring to? Because if you're talking about electrical work involved with it, you need to have a qualified electrician that works under a C10 contractor.
So if you are applying to Communities in Charge to receive some repayment for costs that you have incurred, then you as an applicant do not need to have a C10 license. You may, however, it is not a prerequisite for participation in Communities in Charge. What we aimed to try and describe earlier or remind folks of is that once any applicant is submitting for payment, the general contractor's CSLB license number, as well as the general contractor's signature, must be present on the job site installation form that is submitted as part of their request for payment in order for that request to be validated and ultimately paid out. So to expand on that a little bit further, as an applicant, I may be a facilities manager for a K through 12 school, the facilities manager, for instance, for a multifamily housing development, or I may be a project manager for an EVSP. So the applicant does not need to carry a C10 license themselves in order to apply for and receive incentives for costs they have incurred against a project site that is constructed.
Next question for Jeff. Does funding support replacement of an old or broken level 2 or non-networked level 2?
So if the construction site is, if you're replacing something that has broken, that is not something that we would ultimately want to necessarily incentivize, because if something is, someone backs into the charger and you want to replace that, then that's not something that is we would want to see included in Communities in Charge. Rather, if there are, a better example of this might be if you have stub outs against an existing parking lot that you had planned on putting chargers in on, and you just need to drop those EVSEs on the stub outs, then that would be a project site which may be eligible.
And another question for you, Jeff. Is San Diego County excluded from this round of funding for level 2?
San Diego County is not excluded from funding for this round, as Communities in Charge is a statewide incentive project.
Thank you. And next question for Xiomara. Is the funding only for level 2?
Yes, for this project, it is for level 2 EVSEs. I would refer you to the Golden State Priority Project if you're interested in DCFC.
Okay, just double checking here, make sure I didn't miss any hands. I think that's it for questions, so we can move on. Next slide, please. Well, that is it for our presentation today on the How to Apply workshop. We thank you for your time and attending the workshop, and we're excited to work with you. Please reach out if you have any questions through our website or through our email, and this will be posted on the docket we mentioned earlier. So thank you everyone for attending.